to this meeting of the Resources Committee held on WebEx on the 18th of December 2024. If by any chance I drop off the call for technical connection reasons, I'll ask Caroline Stewart to take over the chair until I'm reconnected. I'd like to welcome colleagues from the SPA, Police Scotland, Scottish Government and HMICS, and DCC Jane Connors representing the senior leadership from Police Scotland. The agenda is basically as published, but I understand that at the item 6.4, the proposed VRBER scheme for 2025-26 has been withdrawn because the Chief Constable would like some additional clarity in certain aspects before it's considered. So the agenda is otherwise as presented. I'd like to remind attendees that members have all read and studied these papers, so any introductory remarks by the presenter should be kept to a minimum and focus only on anything that is not actually included in the paper or anything that's changed since the report was written. This approach will make sure that we can use all the time available for members' questions and move on to them as swiftly as possible. So, on that basis, can I check with Debs, are there any apologies for the meeting?
No apologies. We will be joined later on for the Forensic Services IPC by the chair of the Forensic Services Committee, Paul Eady.
Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest or connections? No. Thank you. And could I ask you to approve items 4 to 7 to be taken in as business in private for the reasons given in accordance with our standing orders?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to section 2. Oh, sorry, 1.5. There haven't been any decisions taken since the last meeting of the committee. So moving on to section 2, minutes and actions from the previous meeting. First of all, 2.1, the minute of the public session of the meeting on the 19th of November. Could I ask for approval to these minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And the action log has got just a few things in it. The first item, the transformational benefits reporting, we're anticipating that this will be dealt with at a session on 16th of January 2025. So we would aim to close that item after that session. Second item, UCCP. That one is included in today's agenda, so the proposal is for that to be closed. The third item on transformational benefits, not yet due. Same with change portfolio oversight, and the change portfolio oversight. The second item is also reflected in our agenda today. On benefits reporting, this one is ongoing. I'm just checking whether we can. It's continued to the sessions and planned on the 16th of January, so that's still open. And the benefits validation is very much ongoing. Really, remain open until March 2025. Are we happy with that? Okay, thank you. So, moving on to section 3, financial monitoring and planning from piece 7. Now, Lynn, I can see you on screen. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, I think you can take it that we've studied the papers. So unless is there anything you want to add to what's actually in the paper before we move on to questions?
Yeah, morning everyone. I was just going to give a quick verbal update on period 8. Period 8 won't formally come through governance just due to the timing of the next resources committee. That will be the Q3 report. So just was going to give a very quick overview on how it's looking at the end of November, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you. That'd be very helpful. That's very much in the category of sort of updates since the paper was written.
Yeah, no, right, great, thank you. So just in terms of revenue, the year-to-date underspend against forecast has it's increased from 1.8 million under to 2.4 million under forecast. That is in line with our expectations, but as already discussed at the previous resources, although we are seeing an underspend on our forecast, it's in line with our expectations, you know, and the overall position is still really challenging when taking into account of all the threats and opportunities that are still there, particularly some of the ongoing pay discussions. So that's just really to say period 8 revenue in line with expectations, and we'll closely monitor that over the coming months. Just in terms of capital, so we've actually seen some significant capital spend in period 8, £11 million in month. So that has taken our capital spend up to 31 million, which is 45% of the forecast. So again, still significant spend required in the final quarter of the financial year, but that is being closely monitored, and the report in the pack does reflect the over-programming that has been approved through the Capital Investment Group. Again, we spoke about that last month, but that just highlights the areas where that has been approved, and that's essentially the contingency items for us to manage the funding position over year end, and we'll obviously report back the full revised Q3 forecast at the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Could I just to clarify, all the expenditure of period 8 of the 11 million, that's presumably issuing the contract awards through procurement and everything like that to actually make sure that everything is delivered in the course of the financial year?
So the 11 million is actual spend that's went through the ledger. So the contracts will be ongoing. There's been contracts awarded, etc. But actual physical spend in terms of year to date is an additional 11 million over and above what's in the period 7 report.
Right. Thank you very much for clarifying that. Right. Over to questions. I'm looking for people. Yeah, Pauline.
Lynn, many thanks for the update on month 8, and I recognise the significant continuing pressures, particularly around the threats and the revenue, and good to see the spend coming through now on capital. As we all know, the Scottish Government presented its budget earlier this month, and there's a potential for further increases in capital for police budget next year, which is very welcome. I guess given the challenges we've had around spend profile this year, however, will be taken forward some learning of lessons around how we make sure that we've got a smoother profile of spend in line with the proposals that we've got around the State's Master Plan, for example, and digital innovation and the 3-year delivery plan. It would be helpful to understand how we're building our capability and capacity going forward, and if we could have a profile of the types of business cases and the dates that we're expecting to see them coming forward to Resources Committee in the coming year.
Thanks, Pauline. James, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I can start. Others may want to add. So we're really acutely aware that actually what we're trying to move to now is a complete shift in mindset around capital, and recognising, working on the basis that we're going to get to 100 million a year, and that will be where we should have been at, but we'll get there and we'll be able to maintain it. So I suppose there's a shift in mindset, first of all, because I think that is important. But you know, we've gone from having these incremental increases year on year, and I think we still have a kind of an approach to capital that, you know, to an extent is something you do off the side of the desk because it's only 25 or 30 million. But as we've seen it grow and grow, you know, we haven't really changed the kind of operating model for the delivery of capital, and that's something that we've now got a real focus on over the coming 6 weeks or so to you know, through a kind of capital task force that has been set up to look at what are the what are the projects we're going to take forward? And from my perspective, specifically in the master plan, and I know other business areas will be doing similar, is looking exactly at that. What is the programme of activity? What are the milestones within that? So that could be business case development, land acquisition, whatever it might be, and understanding when that's going to happen. So there's a real tight programmatic approach that we maybe haven't had that level of discipline in previous years. The second bit is about understanding the resourcing that's required, and that isn't just the people in estates, although there will need to be an uplift of resource into estates, and we've already started conversations on that around what it is that we're going to need to deliver. But it's also about the kind of wider resources in the organisation, and I spoke about this at SLB yesterday. It's for estates master plan, we're going to need legal services to be able to help with transactions. We're going to need more input from procurement around making sure we've got the supply chains in place and we've got resilience in the supply chains, because we've been overly dependent upon our FM provider this year, and that's the reason primarily why we've had to reforecast a reduction in 5 million on estates in the current year. So making sure we've got that in place as well. And putting plans, like again, as part of that programme, having the detailed plans about when are we engaging with procurement to go to market and so on. So it's around just having that rigour and discipline, understanding that there will be an uplift in the amount of resources required, and that'll be across all business areas. And then the finance team are looking about how we can, in order not to put pressure on the revenue budget, that where we can capitalise resources more in order to help with the delivery that we do that. So that's the approach, making sure that there's the money, the resources, the supply chain and the plans.
Thank you very much, James. I think everybody on the Resources Committee would certainly support this revised approach. It's something that, as you know, we've been talking about and expressing concern about for some time. DCC Connors, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and apologies to everybody with not being able to put my video on, but it was just to support James was saying in the kind of wider organisational bit. I think firstly we're a month ahead than we would normally be. We have already started this work, and huge thanks to everybody, particularly in finance. That means we're starting this work now before Christmas, rather than starting it mid-January and then looking at February, March. So we're a month ahead. All of the business areas are involved. We're looking at the profiling and scheduling. And there's a meeting on the 9th of January, which is a prioritisation meeting. So it's just to give reassurance that we actually have all of these dates in the diary. They're all being worked through, and we are a month ahead from where we would normally be.
Thank you. Thank you. Looking at other hands, Caroline, I think you were next.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair, and thanks to both of you actually for that discussion there, because that's answered quite a lot of my questions, because I did ask you to reflect on what was holding up capital, and I think that whole thing about planning early, getting that baked in. But I think there's one element there that perhaps was missing, and that is about delivery. And one of the reasons we're back filling quite a lot is because we're not delivering the projects we've got in the pipe on time. So I think there's something about prioritisation and a focus on getting them over the line in the timescales, which you articulated when the business case came through. So I think there's something about that, because they work kind of hand in hand. Because if you build a pipeline but then you can't execute because you're buffering up with late projects, there's only so much capacity in the organisation, and I think that capacity piece is what's been sort of holding us up. So I think there has to be a little bit of a focus around, we need to get these projects over the line in the timescale we said, so that we can actually start moving some of these on. So I think there's a bit of that. But just to, I did go back through, because I was happening to go back to a business case in 2018, and I just looked at that financial year really. And you see the volume of business cases, we had 12 going through that year, and then I've looked for this year, and for the same kind of period we've got 4. So it just kind of shows you the sort of difference in terms of volume of what we're seeing, so, and where the sort of pace has to go back up to build that pipeline again. So, but I would really have that bit of focus on delivery and prioritisation to make sure things go over the line. Thanks.
Thanks, Caroline. Alistair?
Thanks, Grant. I've got a couple of questions. First of all, it's in relation to the pay award. and I appreciate that there is an ongoing negotiation and sensitivity around it, but you do highlight it as being one of the biggest threats to delivering a balanced budget. I wonder if you could, given the constraints, if you could just expand upon that a little bit more. And then there's a specific in relation to quite a significant non-pay forecast overspend, over £7 million, is highlighted on page 12. And it says it's driven largely by increase in third-party payments and increased cost in supplies and services. I wonder if you could just, explain the reasoning behind that. And my final point is, I really understand the complexity of this budget and the significant number of interdependencies that exist within it. And I would give credit to everybody involved in bringing such a complex budget so close to a balanced budget, and it will be a balanced budget at the end of the financial year. But I've got another question just to flag that I'll bring up during the private session that relates to this. So 2 questions for the moment.
Okay, thanks, Alistair. James.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll take the first one on pay, and then colleagues in finance can pick up on the other one and might want to add to the pay point. The reason fundamentally for the challenge around pay is that we originally budgeted, as you'll know, for 3%, and obviously there has been a lot of moving parts in the course of the year on the budget, primarily driven by the police officer headcount, the numbers of leavers being higher than expected, the length of time it's taken to get back to 16.6. So there has been an underspend coming through there. But when you look at the amount of additional money that was required in order to get to what we were putting there as an offer, to get to 4.75% with some terms and conditions, that was £22 million more than what was in the budget at the start of the year when we budgeted the 3%. Now, looking at the underspend that's coming through on the overall headcount, and then looking at some of the other factors, we are really pushing the boundary on affordability. Now, we did that on the basis that we thought we would get there, that we, in order to get a deal done, we would be able to get there on a non-recurring basis, but it was never without risk. We were pushing the budget to the limits that we absolutely could in order to get what we thought was something to be agreed from a pay perspective. Now, obviously that's not been agreed, and the staff, that's out to ballot. That will be what that will be. Hopefully that will be accepted. But the police officers now, if we go into a situation of arbitration, then there's also an element of uncertainty on that. And like I say, we were really pushing that 4.75%, and I'm not sure whether that's really been understood by the staff associations that this wasn't an easy thing to do. This is us like managing risk on a daily basis to try and be able to offer something that we thought would get a deal, something a long way above inflation. So I think when it comes to what happens through arbitration, that presents a material risk to the delivery of this budget, depending on what that lands, because I couldn't say 100% of a guarantee that we could even get to break even on 4.75. We think we would get there. The best, our best assumptions and estimates tells us we would get there, but it's not a straightforward matter. So that's why it presents a risk to the budget, a risk in the sense of being able to deliver a number that high, and so much more than what we budgeted for in the first place. And then I suppose the uncertainty around if we're in arbitration where, we're not the kind of masters of our own destiny on that one.
Thanks, James. I presume that at this stage, even if it was a question of arbitration, that would be quite a lengthy process and would provide a ongoing uncertainty until that is actually resolved.
Yeah, ongoing uncertainty. I mean, if it wasn't resolved by the end of this financial year, we'd obviously accrue the costs based on what we can afford, and then we would have to then assess where it landed at going into the next financial year. But as I say, you know, it's on the absolute outer limits of affordability where it stands at the moment.
Right. Thank you very much for clarifying that. Second item, Patrick, I see you have your hand up. Is that to answer second item?
Yes, it is, Chair, but happy to pause if there's any further questions on pay, first of all.
Yeah, thank you. Could I just check if there are any further questions on pay? Alistair, is there anything you particularly want to clarify on that?
I think that's been a very clear explanation from James as to how challenging it's been to get to the point that we're at, but there is clearly a lot of good faith still involved going forward in relation to an ongoing negotiation, and that creates uncertainty. So I appreciate that. I don't know if James is able to comment, in and around the offer that's been made and the proposed budget for next year. Is that being taken into account in terms of how you're beginning to put the budget together? You may wish to discuss this more in the private session.
Yeah, I mean, I can make a kind of general comment at the moment, and obviously we can get into more detail when we look at the 25-26 budget paper. But what I would say is that there is sufficient budget coverage in the uplift that we've got for next year to cover the pay awards at a level of 4.75%. I mean, anything over and above that then eats into the question of affordability into future years. So it has that knock-on impact. But as I say, we can speak about that in a bit more detail when we get to that item.
Thank you. That's appreciated.
Thanks. Angela, is your hand up to discuss pay or another aspect? Oh, right.
No, there's another aspect.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Patrick, moving on to Alistair's second question.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the second question around kind of supplies and services. There's a couple of issues kind of driving these kind of pressures. So one part of it is kind of clothing and uniform costs have been increasing. Both in terms of the unit cost and that, but also due to the kind of increased number of kind of probationers. We kind of effectively, our stock ran low. We had to kind of stock up as a result to keep the replenishment going for all our officers. The kind of second element is you'll kind of see in the kind of private session and pre-approvals with this kind of slight increase on kind of professional services to support us in kind of developing our visions, but that is pretty small relatively, but it was slightly out of sync from the budget. But the main pressure that kind of is driving this is increased legal settlements, and the members will be aware that there is a kind of joint working group set up for joint session between the Complaints and Conduct Committee and the SPA Legal Committee in January to do a bit of a deeper dive into these legal settlements, and there was a kind of rolling action for us to report back to this committee kind of the outcome of that meeting in January. So I'm sure we can bring that back in February as well, but that's happening in January, that further deep dive into those processes. I hope that's helpful.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Patrick, that's very helpful. Alice, do you want to add two questions?
No, I appreciate the explanation, and I look forward to the outcome of the deep dive into the legal services, and appreciate the increased recruitment as well. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Angela.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the report. It's more of a governance question. I just wonder, I mean, as Alistair said, it is a large, complex organisation, but in terms of the controls within Police Scotland under some scheme of delegation to officers, I just wonder what the arrangements are to really identify the budget holders and have clarity around their roles and responsibilities to manage within the allocation provided to them.
Very good question.
Yeah, I can maybe start and then maybe hand over to Patrick or Lynn on this. I mean, it is set out, a scheme of delegation around, authority levels and so on. The budget holders, I mean, that is an interesting point. I would probably need to go away and look at that unless Patrick or Lynn has the answer to hand. It's to the extent probably custom and practice about the level. Obviously there's that kind of the different layers. The DCCs ultimately have overall control of certain aspects things, but then, you know, delegated it to ACC's chief supers, and then in some business areas it'll go down to superintendent level. So it's just something that's been built up over many years. I'm not sure if we've got that codified, to be honest. See, Patrick's got his hand up, but certainly for authority levels of spending and so on, that's clear in the scheme of delegation. There's also in the financial regulations, the roles and responsibilities are in there, and then each year we ask budget holders to sign off on their budget to understand their roles and responsibilities in relation to that as set out in the financial regulations. But as to how we've built over time who the budget holders are, that's something I would need to take away unless Patrick has an answer to that.
Thanks, James. Patrick, have you got the answer?
Thanks, James. So effectively, it's kind of built up under kind of the command kind of structure. So as James says, we get each kind of head of department or commander to sign off their budget letter, and that's effectively happened on kind of how the command structure works. So for example, each chief superintendent responsible for a local policing division signs off their accountability kind of letter saying they'll accept the budget settlement and the conditions within our kind of budget guidance. That then replicates to national divisions. So for example, as the head of kind of department for finance, I also sign my kind of budget off. But Angela, I'd be more than happy if it is helpful to kind of meet you out of committee to just explain our processes in a bit more kind of detail. If that's at all helpful, the offer is there.
Right, Angela.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really helpful. I'm just conscious that there's a fine balance between, you know, delegating responsibility to a wide range of individuals and still maintaining that control over expenditure. And sometimes it does have a tendency to grow and expand. Periodically a review is necessary, in my experience anyway. So I would welcome, I'll take you up on that offer, Patrick. Thank you. Thanks,
Angela. James.
Yeah, it was just to give a sense of scale on it. I mean, we do. I know we've got 22,500 people in the organisation, but we are quite tight on the number of people that have budget holder responsibility. I think it's somewhere around about 70 or 80 across the organisation. But again, we'd be able to confirm that. But it was just to give that assurance. There are not that many budget holders really in the context of an organisation of this size.
Right. Thanks, James. Bearing that in mind, and I know that that will be some discussion between Patrick and Angela out with the committee meeting, but I think it would be quite helpful for the outcome of that discussion to be sort of reported back in very summary terms for absolute clarity as to where the responsibilities actually lie, and the importance of the budget holders not just signing off on the budget, but also realising that they're accountable for delivery within it, and how, having got a budget, how any environment is actually dealt with and recorded, and everybody understands the responsibilities. So if we could take that as an action, that would be great. Thank you very much. Any other questions from anybody, any board members? Committee members, I mean. Well, Lynn, thank you very much for the clarity of your paper as usual. It's very well presented, and the slide pack that goes with it, I think, it's very clear and very easy to follow. So thank you very much for that, and thank you for the update on period 8. We look forward to considering that in more detail, and also probably period 9 by the time we get to our next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have this report for discussion and approval, so we're happy to do that. And this really brings us to the